I'm Jeremy Smith. I'm a Rubyist living in Greenville, South Carolina, and I run Hybrid, a tiny one-person web studio. Software development may typically be a team sport, but it doesn't have to be. I've been building web applications for 20 years. Much of that time I've been working alone as an employee, contractor, or a technical co-founder. I feel like I lucked out when I picked up Ruby back in 2009. I believe our community is one of the best for solo devs building on the web. While my talk is codeless, much of what I'm sharing has come from growing up and learning my craft in this community. So some of you may already be doing some solo projects, or at least have the desire to, and others may wonder why you choose to go it alone when there are so many clear advantages to working on a team. So why go solo? Here are my reasons. First is focusing on broad or holistic competence over narrow excellence. This could also be called generalization over specialization. It's easy to see what's great about being a specialist. Specialists are the best at what they do within a narrow frame. It's not always as obvious what's great about being a generalist. So here's an illustration that hopefully highlights what I see as an aesthetic advantage. Imagine a farmer running a small-scale diversified family farm. That farmer has to be competent at constructing infrastructure, building soil, raising many varieties of crops, caring for animals, as well as marketing and selling to customers. This is very different than large-scale monocrop commodity agriculture that's entirely focused on, for example, maximizing corn yield from any given acre. That small-scale farmer is focused on the thriving of their entire system, however small that might be. The large-scale commodity farmer has to optimize for one aspect or outcome, and by nature has to ignore or disregard other parts. Now, I'm not trying to say that specialization is bad. It's important and admirable work, but when it comes to running a small, healthy family farm, you want to be a generalist, not a specialist. Second is optimizing for autonomy. Daniel Pink, who wrote Drive, The Surprising Truth of What Motivates Us, says that there are three aspects to motivation: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Working alone is about the most autonomous that you can be professionally, and while I don't think all three of those aspects are of equal importance for each person, for people who are greatly motivated by autonomy, this can be a good way to work. It reminds me of this 90s post-apocalyptic movie, Waterworld. Kevin Costner pilots his tri-catamaran on endless seas after the polar ice caps melt. He's catching his own food, defending from pirates, and going where he pleases. In his character, I see the satisfaction in having the skill and ability to navigate, repair, and extend a vessel that's bearing you on a journey. It may not be the biggest, the fastest, or the best, but it's yours. And third is what I'll call the pleasure of accumulated sophistication. Taking something from crude and chaotic beginnings to a more and more refined and ordered state over time. This may seem weird, but I've had this pleasure playing Minecraft, where you spawn into a world in the wilderness, and starting with basic natural materials, you slowly build up more sophisticated infrastructure over time. So starting with like a crafting table and a pickaxe, to a hut and a potato patch, to castles and minecart railways and mob farms. At first, you're only focused on survival, but as you progress, you can work to improve your surroundings, bringing order and adding comfort and convenience. This can certainly happen on a team, but I found that when you've done this for yourself, the signs of it are more striking, and there's a deep satisfaction in the process and the result. So, quick sidebar, where do you find solo projects? So briefly, here are the categories that I look for. First is early stage projects. This would be early startups, side hustles, and prototypes that are usually constrained by funding and time. Although if they're successful, you probably won't be solo for long. The second is small indie products. That would be small products built and run by individuals, whether that's you or a solo founder that you take over development for. Third is internal or ancillary apps. So look for organizations that have a need that off-the-shelf solutions don't solve, and also where that product is necessary but maybe not a core focus for them. And finally, throttled projects. And throttled doesn't necessarily mean failing or unimportant projects, but ones where they have some constraint on it where time to market is not the primary concern. So now I'm going to share the 3 keys to building and maintaining web applications on your own. It's really simple. Be good, be fast, don't die. I'm going to break down each key and look at it from the perspective of you personally and also the system that you're building, which includes the code base, yes, but also processes, tooling, infrastructure, vendors, and other participants involved. When I say be good, I'm talking about your knowledge and skills as well as the quality of the application. When I say be fast, I mean the speed of your development, but also the adaptability of the system to changing requirements. And when I say don't die, I don't mean literally never dying, but improving your app sustainability and increasing your own odds of longevity. Altogether, I'll be sharing 24 things I wish I'd known when I got started. So let's talk about being good. First, some advantages and disadvantages. When you're solo, there's no one telling you you're doing it wrong. There's no one to question your architectural decisions or your technology choices, and no one holding back your growth. On the other hand, there's no one to point out your weak areas, to push back on your own decisions and help you improve. There's no one to talk through problems with or review your code, and no one to show off to or celebrate with. How do we make you better? First, find a community of practice. Look for people doing the kind of work that you'd like to do, using the kind of tools that you want to use, who have a strong philosophy and who share their process and learnings with others. Then immerse yourself in their way of thinking and working. Read everything they write, watch their presentations, learn to think like them and solve problems like they do. This can make up, in some ways, for a lack of mentorship. Here are just some of the people, companies, and groups I've learned from over the years. As you learn, you'll eventually find places where your opinions vary from those that you're following, and it's normal when you reach a point where you feel like you've learned everything that you could from a person or a company, and you move on to others. But I think it's always important to have people that you're looking up to. Scan for gaps. When you're working and learning alone, it's easy to have gaps in your understanding or proficiency. You miss concepts and competencies because there's no one there to point them out, and you haven't stumbled onto them in practice yet. This is the difference between informal and formal learning. If you think about a specific discipline or domain, formal learning will be systematic and will closely match the boundaries of that discipline. But informal learning is more organic, with more gaps, but more offshoots too. The trick is to watch the edges and look to the adjacent unknown. So be sensitive to terms and concepts that are connected to what you know, but are unfamiliar in some way, and then use that as a cue to dive deeper. In creative writing classes, I was taught that creating and editing are really separate modes of work that are both necessary but are in tension or conflict. So when you're creating, you want your editor turned off. When you're editing, you want your creator turned off. And it can be tempting to try to combine both modes. A prime example of this can be seen when trying to generate possible solutions to a problem. So when you're working in a group, you can depend on multiple people to surface multiple solutions. But when you're working alone, it can be really easy and tempting to settle for the first feasible solution that you think of. But often that first option isn't the best one, so you want to iterate beyond that. It can also be tempting to simply skip the editor mode because of the fatigue that comes from creating. And what helps here is separating modes by context and time. So one example of how I might do this is when I'm building a feature, I code that feature, create a PR for it, and then come back later and review the PR as if it was submitted by someone else. So I'm coming back a few hours or maybe even the next day back to it, and I've shifted context from a code editor to a GitHub PR review. You need to wear all the hats and not think about yourself as just a developer. I call this the damn it Jim principle. Working solo, you are responsible for everything that's needed to deliver a successful project. If you're creating the UI, then you are the designer. If you will be designing for better or worse. If you have trouble calling yourself a designer, think of yourself as the person responsible for design. Make a proportional investment in learning the various roles that you fill. Design, writing, DBA, sysadmin, marketing, analytics, etc. People love to say what they're not. I'm not a runner. I don't have a green thumb. I can't sing. And while talent does set some people apart, I found that that most roles are a combination of a way of looking at the world and a set of learnable skills that can be applied to solving problems. How do we make your system better? Clarify what you're optimizing for. Organizations have different requirements and tolerances. What would be acceptable practice for one may not be acceptable for another. With each app in its current lifecycle stage, know what you're being asked to optimize for. Try to make the implicit explicit, if for no one else than yourself. Are you optimizing for experimentation, for speed of feature development, for future optionality, stability, or fixed costs? Here are some examples of how that might be framed. We can live with the occasional maintenance window or downtime, but we must keep infrastructure costs below X. Or we can tolerate missing a delivery deadline, but we can't afford to ship a poor user experience. This may seem overly pragmatic, but within reason, I think it's best to align to the priorities of the business and organization and build a system that reflects those priorities. If you disagree with the priorities, address it through discussion and persuasion, but don't intentionally work at cross purposes. It's very tempting to start your problem solving with the skill that comes easiest to you, probably development. What I found is projects do best when you move from intent to content to form to function. It's easier to get the function right when the form is right. It's easier to get the form right when the content is right, and it's easier to get the content right when your intent is right. Changes to each earlier step has a more dramatic effect on the steps after it. So almost every time I start with development, I regret it because I build a suboptimal user experience. My pages all look like rows in a database. When design comes before development, I have a better idea of what I'm programming and the interfaces and flows are better. Every time I start with design, but I don't have the content, I end up just creating visual buckets to dump generic text and images into, and the experience is worse for it. So when I have content before design, the design can reflect and flow out of that content. Learn from failure. When you have production incidents working alone, there are two traps you need to avoid. First, it's easy to think that you can just mentally file it away as a lesson learned, but memory isn't perfectly reliable. I found great value in writing postmortem reports detailing how and why a failure occurred, what the customer impact was, and what my own response was. It's important to review your incidents, especially to see if you have recurring issues. Second, it's easy to convince yourself that you just don't have time to do anything about the underlying problems. However, long term, this will lead to more of your time spent on operational issues over development. You may have heard of the 5 whys technique, but since it's just you, I'd recommend the 3 whys technique. Ask why the incident occurred, then ask why again, repeating this 3 times. Each answer exposes a level that could be improved. So here's an example, a customer didn't receive an important daily summary email. Why? The nightly job that sends the summary email failed halfway through. Why? That job iterates over the customers to send each email, and there was a timeout on one email delivery causing the job to crash. Why? I hadn't anticipated or tested failure states. So next, propose an investment that you can make to each of those levels that's proportionate to the failure itself. If the incident was minor, the investment should be small. If the incident was major, the investment should be large. In this example, that might mean add alerting on job failure or the absence of successful delivery. Switch to a fan-out approach with a separate background job for each customer email delivery with a retry on failure. And finally, set aside some personal research and learning time. And then you want to take action on at least one of those investment areas. Sometimes it can feel really overwhelming thinking about how you could possibly improve the state of your entire system. So one of the techniques that I've found really helpful is this idea of ratcheting up. Set a baseline where you are right now, however bad or good, and then slowly step it up over time with whatever budget you have available to make improvements. This might be introducing code format and style tools, increasing automated test coverage, improving app response times, updating or removing dependencies, or adopting a design system. You don't need to do everything at once, and it wouldn't be wise to. But you can commit to small improvements along several axes that are all headed in the right direction. When possible, look for ways to automate those ratcheting commitments. That might mean configuring CI to fail under certain conditions, or it might just mean setting a recurring calendar event to spend an hour on a certain problem every month. How do we be fast? First, some advantages and disadvantages. There's no time spent building consensus, no time wasted fighting over tools or approaches, and no time needed to coordinate work with other people. However, there's no parallelizing work with others, no momentum that you also gain from a team, and no one to get you unstuck. How do we make you faster? When starting a project or feature, focus on your areas of your biggest unknowns. In project estimation, they talk about the cone of uncertainty. At the beginning of a project, you are the most uncertain about what you're building and how long it will take. The further that you go, the closer you are to certainty. If you start by working on the parts of the project you know the most about, you get a false sense of progress. You're getting work done, but you aren't narrowing the cone of uncertainty. As a result, you'll often spend too much of your time budget on the things that you're most familiar or comfortable with. By tackling your biggest unknowns first, you expose hidden complexity and gain clarity, narrowing that cone sooner. That clarity will help you better budget your time and be realistic about what it'll take to deliver the entire feature or project. Inventing stuff is fun, but with the constraint of working alone, shipping is paramount. Steal as much as possible. Obviously, using open source tools is one way, but I'm also thinking about UX patterns, design and copy inspiration, and playbooks and processes. Whatever you're trying to do, someone's done it before you. Life, work, and art are all filled with riffing and remixing. We're meant to build on the work of others, but we need some guidelines for the right kind of stealing. Austin Kleon, who wrote Steal Like an Artist, gives us this breakdown of good versus bad theft. Honoring instead of degrading, studying instead of skimming, stealing from many instead of stealing from one, crediting instead of plagiarizing, transforming instead of imitating, and remixing instead of ripping off. Reduce work in progress. When working alone, there's a tendency to believe that you can go faster by multitasking, and there's also sometimes pressure from the organization to prioritize many things at once. But if you want to go fast, reducing work in progress is one of the simplest things that you can do that can make a significant difference. As a rule of thumb, I'd say that you should keep your work in progress to no more than 2 things at a time, maybe one major and one minor, like one new feature and one maintenance task. If you get blocked on one, you can switch to the other. Any more than that, and you start to lose efficiency due to context switching, and your morale declines because it takes longer to complete any one thing. I love backpacking, and one of the things that I've learned in the past couple of years is that I need to consciously shift gears based on the changes in the terrain. You may want to go fast overall, but that doesn't mean that your speed should be a constant. So you need to downshift when going up or down, focusing on stability, and then you pick up speed on clear straightaways, but if you get to roots and rocks, you want to slow down again. That's where you're going to fall, and a fall can be serious, especially alone. In software, that means slowing down when you get to tricky things like data and security. Think, what terrain am I in right now? What bad stuff could happen? Pay attention to your gut instincts. Do you feel nervous? There may be a good reason for that. With no one to help you get back to a good state, it's even more important that you plan your riskiest moves. You can minimize that risk through doing extra research, making small, careful, incremental changes, using plans and checklists, and predetermined rollback strategies. How do we make the system faster? Keep your technology minimal and as ordinary as possible. Stick to the tools that you know well. Aim for getting multiple benefits or solutions out of each tool that you have. In Choose Boring Technology, Dan McKinley suggests that teams have a certain number of innovation tokens they can spend. He says innovation tokens represent our limited capacity to do something creative or weird or hard. We really don't have that many of these to allocate. Early on in a company's life, we get like maybe 3. And I'd say if you're working solo, you get maybe 1 innovation token, and it should probably be connected to the core differentiator of your product. Each new technology takes time to learn and master, and it brings downsides and limitations that you aren't even aware of yet. Each tool has a carrying cost that you will pay over the lifetime of its use. There is a minimum set of required tools, but after a certain point, adding new tools should be done very cautiously. Technical debt can make progress faster in the short term, but will almost always be slower in the long term. The only time in my experience that it will make development faster over the long term is if the thing that you build quick and dirty gets thrown away. The savings will be whatever additional time you would have needed to build at a high level of quality. If that thing that you build quick and dirty lives on, however, development will be slower every time you touch it until you finally come back and improve its quality. So here are my general rules for technical debt. If what you are building is speculative, if the business and owner and users have a high tolerance for failure, or if your product is default dead, meaning that based on the current trajectory the project may not survive, then these could be good times to use technical debt. If you are feeling pressure to deliver a specific feature faster than normal, then it might be a time to use technical debt, provided the organization understands there will be additional costs to pay later. But however, if you are always feeling pressure to cut corners and deliver things fast, this is probably just an unhealthy environment. Build feedback loops. Going fast over the long term requires a high confidence in your system, that what you've already built is working properly, and that any changes you introduce also work properly. Build that confidence with feedback loops. The first level is automated tests. I was skeptical about automated testing for years. What I didn't account for was how much time I was spending on manual testing just to make up for a lack of automated tests, and how a lack of tests led to uncertainty and anxiety about making changes, which ultimately led to going slower. The second level is production observability. If there are errors in production, if app performance is degraded, if users aren't able to accomplish their work, you need to know about it as soon as possible. Use an exception tracker, an app performance monitor, and track the key metrics connected to user outcomes. The third level is a good line of communication to customers. Work with customer support if you have them to help them filter and surface their important feedback to you, and also let them know about the changes that you're making that may affect them or that they should be watching out for issues about. While we all love writing code, you need to prefer less of it. Remember, it's not just the production costs, it's that long-term maintenance cost as well. Be disciplined about not building things for future imagined scenarios. In my experience, the future is always different than I expected, and I've definitely wasted time building something that was never used or wasn't quite right. And use off-the-shelf solutions where you can. Can you buy a reporting tool instead of building it into your admin panel? Can you rent an integration until you know for sure that you need to build your own? If it's not core to the product and the costs are manageable, just prefer buying. Let's talk about not dying. First, some advantages and disadvantages. You have the satisfaction of knowing that you built this yourself, and you have the complete ownership and responsibility. On the flip side, you can't easily leave, and the project is in danger of failing without you. How do we make you more sustainable? Be your own best manager. Working solo, there's a good chance you're either unmanaged or undermanaged. And even if no one is assigned to it, that is still a job to be done. Take time to step outside of your role and think about yourself as a direct report that you care about and want to succeed. Recognize and celebrate your accomplishments. Look for barriers to progress and brainstorm how you might be able to remove them. Look for friction with other parts of the organization and raise those issues. Watch for signs of your own frustration, fatigue, or anxiety and take steps to address them. When things go wrong, be compassionate with yourself. Blameless postmortems are important, even when it's just you. Take time to communicate the value you're creating to your client if you're a consultant, to your non-technical partners or investors if you're part of a startup, or to your customers and users if you're building an indie app. No one else is going to do this. There's likely no team lead or technical manager to recognize and understand your contributions and then communicate those to others. It's easy to think that your work will just speak for itself, but it often doesn't. You need to speak for the work that you've done and communicate the value that you've created to the people that you serve. You'll likely have to initiate those communications on your own, and you may need to be creative about how you do that. Move to successively higher levels of consideration. I once heard that there are 3 phases when you through hike the Appalachian Trail, which is over 2,000 miles long and can take 6 months to complete. In the first third of the hike, you're focused on your gear. My pack hurts my hips, my shoes feel funny. How do I pitch my tent quickly when a rainstorm is coming? In the second third, you're focused on the terrain, learning to read the landscape, understanding the weather, and noticing plants and animals, and learning to navigate. In the last third, you're focused more internally, like, who am I? What's my purpose? And I like to think that something similar happens over the course of a career building products. You start off focused on your tooling, learning this language and framework and database, and then you can look up and focus more on the terrain, on how you navigate the development process, and on what you're implementing. And after you've built a lot of things and found processes that work for you, you start to look more internally. No longer am I building things right, but am I building the right things? What should I be doing that I haven't been asked to do? How can I do better at helping my partners, clients, or customers? While this progression likely happens naturally, each stage gives you a new focus and a reason for staying the course. Work on multiple projects. At a certain point, it will be hard to improve your knowledge and your skills in a single domain or problem space. There's a natural pressure in projects where you work alone for you to remain, even when it's no longer beneficial to you. I recommend that you reevaluate how a project is progressing you in your career every couple years and move on if it's not. Another option, which is challenging but has worked for me, is working on multiple projects at once. How do we make the system more sustainable? When technology changes come and it's just you, you need to stay in the big boat. You may have seen the adoption curve before. This is how the larger community can migrate to new tools and services over time. The safest place for you to be is when you're solo, is with the majority. When changes are coming, you need to let organizations with more margin explore that migration path and expose the rough edges and document the processes before you attempt it. But you also don't want to be the last to migrate either, because context can be lost, and if you need assistance, it will be harder to find when most of the community has moved on. This is true of libraries that fall out of fashion, frameworks that change versions, platforms that get disrupted, and third-party services that shift focus or change pricing. And I've had all those things happen to me in the past 10 years. It's very hard to get things done in a low-trust environment and unhealthy to remain long-term. Fostering trust builds psychological safety, which is needed by all the humans involved. That's you, business owners, other staff members, and users. And trust is built in many things: other people and teams, the larger organization, as well as processes, tools, and infrastructure. Instead of trying to evaluate each of those trust relationships, just watch for the signs of distrust. Surprise or anger because expectations weren't met, decisions or action being hidden from others, hesitancy to change code, infrastructure, or process because of previous bad experiences, excessive verification or micromanagement, long-running debates without resolution, and a lack of collaboration. Then look for ways that you can foster trust where it's lacking. Spend more time together. Apologize or make repair attempts when appropriate. Increase the transparency or the level of detail. Change the communication medium. Propose solutions that better align interests. And clarify expectations and commit to follow through. At some point, you're probably going to want or need to leave a project, so plan on it. Build as if you had a team, or as if you were getting ready to hand that project over. This way, you'll always be ready when you need to. That means things like keeping all your credentials in a password manager that someone else has access to, keep a README up to date, write automated tests, use a project management tool, document the what and why of your architectural decisions, and keep run books and write down all your processes. Even if you don't have the discussion with your client or partners, come up with a plan for who would take over this project if you were unable to continue. Maybe you hand over to an in-house developer. Maybe you identify a few agencies you could recommend your client to go to. Maybe you tell them how to find other developers that do what you do. This can be an act of care and service that to your clients or partners that wouldn't typically be asked for, but when needed would be a relief. So let's get real. The truth is, you're never really solo. No one is creating just for themselves. We're creating to influence or serve someone else, to communicate, and ultimately to connect. You may be the sole person responsible for the care and keeping of a web application, but there are others close by. Maybe you're a consultant and it's like you're in one of those old-fashioned dance marathons and your dance partner is your client. I won't say which one is you. Or maybe you're the technical partner in a business venture like that crew in a heist movie, and you're the one whose specialty is building web products. Everyone else is relying on you to pull off your part flawlessly so you can all retire after this one last job. Or it may be that you're building a little SaaS business and it's like running a food truck, where you're spending almost as much time driving to where customers are, taking orders, and interacting with people on social media as you are prepping food. Whatever the case may be, building web applications as your livelihood means making something of value for others, which always means interaction and co-creation. Because in the end, it's the things that we make together and the way we relate to our clients, our partners, and our users that really matters. Thanks.